Maybe we should just read. Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Hayes Reviews. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and today is Good Friday, and I hope you're all doing well. It's good to be back. It's been far too long. It's been it's been 2 entire months, basically, since I've been able to get on here and do a live stream for you. And today we're going to be continuing with our reading of the excellent foundational text. That wasn't a pun, which I intended. It's a book that is so revelatory in terms of how the world works, and it gives you an insight into things that are often overlooked and assumed to be benign and beneficent, but in fact they are anything but. Of course, tonight we are continuing with Rene Worms's book, Foundations, Their Power and Influence. This is part 4 of the series, and if you are not yet caught up on the first 3 parts, what can I say? You've had 2 months to get caught up, so it's really on you. It's your fault, isn't it? But I hope you're all doing well. It's very good to see Frank in the YouTube chat, and indeed it is. It's good to be back after the long sleep. I have been traveling, and then I got stranded abroad because of the Iran war. Don't you notice that everything that bad happens these days is blamed on the war? Especially all the prices going up everywhere and at every turn. But I was stranded, and I got stuck there for an extra 2 weeks while I sorted through the visa bureaucracy, and I tried to find another flight that wouldn't attempt to take me over the war zone or through the war zone. And so I flew back via Hong Kong and had a nice 14-hour direct flight into Manchester, during which I watched 5 films, fairly new films, and they were all garbage. Nothing to recommend. The only film I saw on the flights that I might possibly recommend to mature people with a sense of humor and who like to be dazzled by special effects and aren't averse to strange, wacky concepts such as the multiverse, would be a film called Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's wacky, it's funny, it's silly, it's a bit rude. There's a lot of sexual jokes in there, but it's well done, and it's got a good heart. More so than a lot of the films I watched, which were nihilistic. One of the themes I picked up on was absent fathers or dead fathers or neglectful, terrible fathers. You know, there's not a lot of positive fathers out there in film and TV land. But Everything Everywhere All at Once, that did have a bit of a family theme to it, which did make me feel good at the end. I may have even welled up a little bit and possibly shed a tear, but don't tell anybody. But yes, it's good to be back, and I am so grateful indeed. I'm going to check that everything is looking good on my side, because when you haven't done this for a while, you start to worry a little bit, and you forget which buttons need to be pressed in what order. And that's why the YouTube stream came on mid-countdown instead of pre-intro, because I was standing here thinking, there's something I haven't pressed yet. What am I missing? And it was the button that says go live on YouTube, and I'd forgotten to hit that one. So if you're watching on YouTube, I apologize that you didn't get to see the full extent of my homemade intro video to the live stream. But you caught the whole thing if you're on Rumble. So there you go. There's a little bit of a possible advantage and bonus to being on Rumble. So we're back. We're continuing with Foundations. It's a really great book. I love it very much. I'm really out of practice, and I feel like I'm lacking good knowledge of the first 3 parts to do a recap. But I did manage to review one part of the first episode in this series, going through the background of the Rees Commission and the people involved, the author of the book, Rene Wormser, and Rees himself. I think he's called something Carol Rees. I don't know what he was. A lot of men used to be called Carol in the past. I don't know if they were just ahead of their time. But you got Carol Quigley, and you've got, I think he's called, is it Joyce Carol Rees or something like that? Or am I thinking of Joyce Carol Oates? I could probably find it in the book if I just look. He's called Brazila Carol Rees. That's it. I knew he had a strange name. Brazila. I don't know. Strange names in the past. But he and Wormser did a little introduction to the book, and they were explaining how this isn't the first time that the foundations had been investigated. This book was written in 58, and so the investigations will have been carried out in the early to mid 50s. But there had been predecessors to this commission, notably the Cox Commission or Committee. I always get commission and committee mixed up. But there was a Cox Committee slash commission, and there was one before that as well. The Cox Committee ended up with the question, to what extent are these foundations aiding and abetting Marxist activities? And then Rees comes in with Wormser, and they're looking into to what extent the foundations are funding political activities. And this was covered in the first, I think the third part, or the second part actually, of the reading, where the difficulties of figuring this out were explained, and the difficulties were kind of built around ambiguity in legislation and not defining what the difference is between education and propaganda. And so the legislation says, well, no propaganda, we don't approve of that, so don't do it. And then the foundations come along, such as ones we've heard of in other books, like the League for Industrial Democracy, which was a socialist organization set up in America by people connected to the Fabian Socialists. You can read all about that in Fabian Freeway. And they said, we're not engaging in propaganda, it's just education. We're just educating people about how evil capitalism is and about how wonderful Marxism and socialism is. And there was another example about the World Government Convention or something. And they were saying, oh, no, that's not political. Not political. So, yes, if you haven't yet and you have some time, very much worth going back and catching up on the first three parts of the book. So I don't really expect a lot of live people or activity in the chats tonight. It's wonderful to have you here, Frank. You are the stalwart companion of Hayes Reviews. Yeah, I'm very glad to see your comments popping in there. Saying, talking about the cinema, you haven't been for years. Why? Well, modern day films are rubbish, ideological rubbish. That is spot on, exactly. I did manage to watch a film called Heat from the 90s. It's got Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in it, and that's really good. But it was made in the 90s. It's very engaging. The performances are fantastic. Pacino does an outstanding job in his role, and they're sort of facing off against each other. It's a cops and robbers story, but that one's not too bad. So I have a feeling the further back you go in time, the better quality the films are going to be in terms of content and ideology and the stories that they tell. These days, it's all trash. It's all an absolute waste of time. You're better off catching up on the 12 books that we've read on this channel so far under the playlists tab. That is correct. We've done 12. I'm just going to count them to make sure I'm getting my numbers right. I think this is the 13th, but let's see. We did Romance of the Rothschilds. We did The Open Conspiracy, The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation, The Next Million Years. We did Has Man a Future by Bertrand Russell. The Fearful Master. We did Fabian Freeway. How many is that so far? That's 7. We did Between Two Ages, Lusitania, The Sustainable Prince. That's 10. Milner Fabian Conspiracy, 11. And Endgame, Hidden Agenda 21 by Vernon Coleman. That's 12. So this is our 13th book that we've decided to read through in its entirety and get it on the record and add some context and commentary as we go. There aren't so many channels out there doing what I do. So if at any point you're listening to this now or in the future and you feel like chucking me a few quid to support me and encourage me and remind me that this is important, valuable work, then you can do so at allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. And you can check out the other things. Everything is there. That's a one-stop shop for all the things that I have, social media pages, ways to get in touch, etc., etc. But I think for all those books that we've read, and they're all fantastic, this one that we're going through right now is perhaps the most important. It's definitely up there in the top 3, I would say. And I'm very excited to read tonight's section, which is all about, as you can see on the screen, scientism. So social science and scientism. Now, I mentioned in the part 1 episode of this series that I was surprised to see scientism written down in the contents of the book as a section This is chapter 4 that we're going into, because I always thought scientism was a sort of derogatory term for people who worship science like it's a religion. And you might have your various religions, and the people who are materialistic and atheistic and scientific, quote unquote scientific, tend to scoff and laugh at those other religions. Oh, you believe in ghosts and there's a big granddaddy in the sky looking after you, and they think they're high and mighty and superior. And then some man in a white coat comes along and says, hey, you got to put this mystery concoction in your arm to stop other people getting a cold. And they say, okay, yeah, let's do that. So there's traps and pitfalls and risks in any ideology, whether that be a mainstream religion, whether that be some sort of niche cult, maybe worshipping UFOs or beings and aliens from other galaxies and stars, or whether that's science, right? If you are not scientifically literate, if you don't know how to read scientific papers and apply the scientific method yourself, then you're using faith and you're using belief and you're using what you mock and ridicule the churchgoers for doing. You see, only in this day and age, that is the mainstream way of approaching life. And so you feel comfortable because everybody else trusts the white coats. Everybody else trusts the people with graphs and computer models and degrees framed above their desks. And so because everyone else is doing it, you feel comfortable doing it as well, because that many people couldn't be wrong. You couldn't hoodwink so many millions and billions of people, could you? Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but yes, you could. We've all been hoodwinked. We have all been lied to. We've all been misled. And we are all suffering because of our ignorance, right? And I pronounce it that way deliberately because the problem here is that we are ignoring information. We are ignoring what is out there, what is accessible at our fingertips. At no point in history have we ever been so well informed. I've heard Alan Watts say many times that we are the best informed slaves that have ever existed. Usually in the past, people didn't have access to archives of ebooks and public domain books that were online. People didn't have access to Amazon and eBay and American Book Exchange and bookfinder.com, where you could literally, as I have done, build yourself a reference library that you can learn from for the rest of your life. People couldn't do that. So there was a different word for that. The word was nescient, right? If the information is not available and you have no access to it and no way of knowing what the information is, then you are nescient. But when you have the internet, when you have all the search engines and the tools and the technology at your fingertips, and you choose not to look at it and you choose not to educate yourself, then you are ignoring that information and therefore you are ignorant. Okay, you see how this works. And so on this channel, we are trying to not be ignorant. We're trying to do the opposite of that. I'm not sure what it is, but we are searching. We are researching, right? The information that we're finding is not new information. We're not discovering things here. We're not testing the limits of, we're not writing PhDs, testing the limits and the boundaries of established knowledge and poking it a little bit further in a very specific niche area. We are researching for information that is out there, that is publicly available, that has been known for a long time. Now, one of the things that I said in a previous video of this series is that this book tells us that foundations have been under scrutiny for a very long time. Before, as I said, before Reese got onto the case and Wormser, foundations have been known to not do what they say and were set up to do. They are vehicles of tax evasion and wealth preservation. That's what Wormser tells us primarily. But they're also ways of funding ideas, right? These are ways of promoting ideology. And so, as you said, Frank, the films nowadays are full of ideological rubbish. Well, that ideology is very well funded and is put out there for a reason. And I would wager that you and I, Frank, are not the targets of that ideology. I think it's the young people, the impressionable people, the people who are yet to come to a logical worldview and understanding of how things work. And so they are ripe for the picking. And they watch these films and they enjoy the adventures and they watch the good guys beat the bad guys and they are amazed by the graphics and the fights and the romances and all that stuff. The stories there aren't that many stories, right? I've got a book over there called The 7 Basic Plots. There's 7 stories in the world. If you want to boil it down. Kurt Vonnegut might have had a slightly different number, but he had the same sort of idea. There are not that many stories. But the stories are not the main point. The stories are the delivery mechanism for the ideology. And the ideology comes through in dialogue that isn't key or important. It's offhand comments, it's attitudes, it's facial expressions, it's the way a character treats another character. You watch this as a viewer, as a young, impressionable mind who hasn't researched this stuff and isn't able to see it in real time. And you see the way the young person treats the old person, and then you mimic that and mirror it in your life. And then suddenly you view old people in a certain way. They're old, they're out of touch, they've got nothing to add, no value in talking to them. It's just a chore, you got to go and visit the family and spend time with granny or whatever it might be. And so people are updated in this way. To use Alan Watts' term, people are downloaded, right? And all this ideology that gets put in films is funded. And where does that funding come from? Well, a very likely culprit, a good place to look, a rock we might want to turn over to look at the creepy crawlies underneath, could be the foundations. And I think so far in the book, there's a very good case laid out by Wormser and Rees. So the book mainly focuses on Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford foundations, others as well. But he says somewhere in the intro that those big main foundations, American foundations, control 50% of the money and the wealth that's in foundations altogether, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of foundations. So, as described back in the 50s in this book, the structure of the foundations and the way the money is spread out among them kind of mirrors that pyramid structure that we see recreated down through the ages over and over again in corporations, in religions, in political parties, various systems. There's always a pyramid structure. There's always a minority at the top, super wealthy, super powerful, super influential, and there's always the plebes and the plebs at the bottom fighting each other and scrapping around for the little bits that are left over once the fat cats have had their fill. No different with the foundations. So he mentioned at one point that there was, I can't remember how many, but maybe 10,000 applications were being submitted for tax-exempt status. And of all the ones that were granted, a handful of these foundations controlled 50% of all the wealth that was in foundations and utilized by foundations. So it's a kind of, what do you call it, that repeating pattern that you see when you zoom in and zoom out, and it's the same thing. See, I haven't live streamed for so long, I forgot to bring my words with me. I'm stuck on like tessellation, but that's not what I want to say. It's a structure which repeats and recreates itself. When you zoom in and zoom out, you see the same structure. I'm just going to have to describe it like that and hope that Frank knows what I'm talking about. I think you're the only person here, Frank, so hopefully if nobody watches this, they'll never figure out that I just couldn't recall what that word is at all. But it's the same structures, the same strategies, the same techniques, the same tactics down through the ages over and over again, just rebranded, just given different names, just given different justifications and arguments to support them, but it's the same thing, right? That was one of the key takeaways for me from listening to Alan Watts' work for quite a few years now. And then once you have that concept in your head that the world is that way, then you start to see it. And then you study and you learn more, and things fit into that model of reality. And it explains why we've gone from kings and emperors and warlords to presidents and prime ministers and politicians. Mobs, organized crime, they always have one guy at the top leading them. Oh, we're told that. It might be a small group. It might be a little council of 12. It's usually 12 people, isn't it? A council of 12. And this is the way it works. This is how the magic trick is done. And we see it again and again and again. And the foundations are no different. So, good to have you here, watching on the replay, tuning in live, whatever it may be. We're going to crack on tonight. This might be a slightly shorter live stream because I haven't done one for so long. So I might run out of breath. My throat might get itchy. I might run out of words. I might just completely fluff every point I'm trying to make because my words have, I left them in Hong Kong. I didn't bring them back with me. But it is good to be back, and it's good to be live streaming again. And I was going to put this off. I was going to wait till next week, and I got a lovely word of encouragement from a very dear friend to say, look, your people, they need you to be regular. They need you to be visible, and you should get out there and do it. If you don't want to do it, that's a sign that you definitely should do it. So push through, feel the fear, and do it anyway, as they say. So here we are. And I thought, it doesn't have to be anything unusually special or extra. I can just get on here and read through a chapter or so, and it could be a nice short one. Because we've all got lives, we've all got Easter weekend to enjoy. Well, not all of us. We're not all living in places that recognize Easter weekend or celebrate it. But I'm sure many people watching this will be having plans, get-togethers, dinners, that sort of thing lined up for the weekend. And so I don't want to take too big a chunk out of that for people. But it is good to be back, nevertheless. Now, since I got back from my travels, I have been working really hard on a new project, which I'm just going to tease here. I really wanted to get it ready to reveal tonight, to put out there and release and tell people about, but it's not quite ready. And being the perfectionist that I am, it might never be ready because I keep finding things to tweak and change. But basically, if you're interested in books, if you're interested in reading and collecting and finding inspiration for what to read and maybe what books to buy, then this upcoming, what can I call it? I was going to call it a product, but it's not for sale. It's free. So it's not a product, but it's a resource. We'll call it a resource. This upcoming resource, you're going to like it. So hopefully next Friday, I will have more details on that. You will be able to grab yourself a copy and enjoy it and put it to good use, I hope. But for now, I'll just leave it at that and tell you I've been working really hard, like flat out for 2 weeks. It's another reason why I haven't streamed any sooner, because I just wanted to get this thing done. And it's at that point where it's good enough to put out there, but it's not quite good enough by my standards. But we'll get it done. We'll keep hammering away, chipping away. Tweaking and twiddling, and at some point I'll just have to let it go. This is how things work, right? When you get into creating something, you want it to be good before you put it in front of people, and there's always room for improvement. This is life. There's always an opportunity to be better, do better, improve your skills, your knowledge, to streamline, to be more efficient, to add a little bit more value somewhere here and there. And it's actually not a bad way to approach life. If you look at it, how can I do this better? How can I be more expert in this thing that I'm trying to achieve and that I'm trying to do? But by the same token, you got to have balance, and you've got to know when it's good enough. Okay. So vague words of wisdom there. But yeah, I'm looking forward to bringing it to you as well, Frank. And I think you'll appreciate it for sure. So it's coming. Hopefully a week from now, Foundations Part 5, I will have a good announcement for you. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. It is lovely to be back. It looks like we are live and kicking in all the right places where we are supposed to be. And so let's get into the book reading, shall we? Don't have anything else to announce or say at this point. I did update some software, and so I thought I was expecting some tech gremlins tonight, but so far so good. Everything looks nice and smooth, and that is very reassuring. So let's do it. Let's get into the book. So this is, as I was saying, Chapter 4, Social Science and Scientism. The previous chapters are must-reads. And actually, before we get into this chapter, I'll just reread the final paragraph of the previous chapter, because I think it sets the scene a little bit, and it gives a nice summary. But this whole paragraph here is worth quoting if you can get a screen grab. It's page 82. And Wormser ended chapter 3, which was called The Concentration of Power, with these words. The emergence of this special class in our society. So the special class are the people who run and manage and are responsible for doling out the foundation money. The emergence of this special class in our society, endowed with immense powers of thought control, is a factor which must be taken into account in judging the merits of contemporary foundation operations. The concentration of power, or interlock, which has developed in foundation-supported social science research and social science education, is largely the result of a capture of the integrated organizations by like-minded men. The plain, simple fact is that the so-called liberal movement in the United States has captured most of the major foundations and has done so chiefly through the professional administrator class. So these are your bureaucrats. They go to meetings, they push papers and pens all day long, and they don't produce anything, they don't fix things, they don't build things. They're just professional administrators. And he says, which has not hesitated to use these great public trust funds to political ends and with bias. So right there, he's answered the question and the main purpose of the Rees committee, which is to find out if there's any political bent to what these foundations are doing. And he's figured it out by the end of chapter 3 that yes, there is. Very much so. There's a special class of administrators. They're choosing who gets the money, which means people will fall in line to do what is required to get the money. And I talked on this in the last few videos. I remember saying that the money and the funding dictates what science is done, right? Because as a scientist, you need grants to do your research. And if there's no grant money available for your research, then your research is not happening. And so what then occurs as a result of this is you get some funding, then you run out of funding, but you design your research in such a way that you're going to need more rounds of funding. And so you spend all the funding you get, and then you go back and you say, well, we're not quite done, and now we're going to do this next. Give us more money. And you end up on this sort of treadmill of foundation grants. You become addicted to this. And the requirements that are put in place, the forms that have to be filled out, the committees that have to look at it and give it the green stamp in order for that money to be released to fund a Mr. or Mrs. Scientist or Miss Scientist, means that there's a ideological capture on what is done and what is carried out and what is investigated. And that little paragraph there sums it up very nicely. So get back and watch the first 3 videos in the series. You will not be disappointed. But today we're reading Social Science and Scientism. I think this is going to be a good chapter. So let's get into it. Politics in the social sciences. In Chicago in 1949, a group of social scientists adopted the term behavioral sciences. So they just made it up. They gave their reasons for selecting the new term. Quote, first, because its neutral character made it acceptable to both social and biological scientists, and second, because we foresaw a possibility of some day seeking to obtain financial support from persons who might confound social science with socialism. That confusion has existed in some minds, is evidenced by one legislator who said that social science was the pursuit of long-haired men and short-haired women. That's a good way to sum up like the hippie movement. I like it. Continuing. While such confusion may be amusing, foundation support in the social sciences does take on special and serious importance. Though much of the research and teaching in these disciplines may have no relationship whatsoever to politics, legislation, or even to public affairs, a large and vociferous sector of the social scientists actively seeks to redesign our government and our public life. It is difficult to understand how tax-exempt funds can properly be used to support the idiosyncrasies of these self-appointed reformers. In the face of the weakness of the controlling tax law, which I have pointed out, it behooves foundations to exercise care and restraint. Here is an illustration of aggressive political mindedness from the words of one of the leaders of the Foundation-supported social science world, Professor Harold D. Lasswell, in his inaugural address as president of the American Political Science Association. Quote, "One of our professional responsibilities is to expedite the development of more perfect institutions specialized to continual self-observation on a global scale, originating policy alternatives by means of which goal values can be maximized." So he's talking about the global scale here, which reminds me that upcoming in this book, a later chapter, maybe 7, is foreign policy, Foundation impact on foreign policy, and that has a lot of sections on internationalism, which I'm really looking forward to reading. So it's on a global scale. And then he comes out with a good bit of corporate waffle there, originating policy alternatives by means of which goal values can be maximized. We're all about maximizing goal values, right? Everybody knows what that means. Or is it just me? Professor Lasswell continues, "Compared with an entire university, which has become a non-communicating aggregate of experts," good description of a university there, "each department of political science can be a true center of integration where normative and descriptive frames of reference are simultaneously and continuously applied to the consideration of the policy issues confronting the body politic as a whole over the near, middle, and distant ranges of time. The profession is advantageously situated, therefore, to take the lead in a configurative approach to the decision process in society. Where it plays this part, political science is the policy science, par excellence." So let me just reread that bit. Where it plays this part, political science is the policy science, par excellence. Part of our role, as the venerable metaphor has it, is scanning the horizon of the unfolding future with a view to defining in advance the probable import of what is foreseeable for the navigators of the ship of state. It is our responsibility to flagellate our minds toward creativity, toward bringing into the stream of emerging events conceptions of future strategy that, if adopted, will increase the probability that ideal aspirations will be more approximately realized. Oh, we got Mel in the chat as well. How's it going, Mel? Good to have you here, and I hope you're having a lovely day playing your well-deserved games and resting and recuperating. Don't worry about understanding it. You're coming in at part 4. I nearly said fart poor there. You're coming in at part 4, so you don't have the background and the context of what's going on now in the book. But, give it a go. You might learn something. So, carrying on. If these involved phrases leave any doubt about the political intention of social scientists of Professor Lasswell's mind, their actions in association with government do not. Many of these scholars, including Professor Lasswell, serve as, quote, experts and advisors to numerous governmental agencies. Social scientists may be said to have come to constitute a 4th major branch of government. Wow. I mean, we saw this in especially behavioral sciences. We know about this with like the nudge unit and the way behavioral psychologists were recruited to make sure people behaved properly and correctly during the Big C event. So they're a 4th major branch of government. And this was back in the 50s, remember. Continuing. They are the consultants of government, the planners and the designers of governmental theory and practice. They are free from the checks and balances to which the other 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial, are subject. They have attained their influence and their position in government mainly through foundation support, and this support in the past has been chiefly given to persons, institutions, and ideas of a progressive liberal, if not socialist, colouring. This whole bit here is important. In a pamphlet entitled Science's Morality, published by the Humanist Press in 1953, George Simpson adds his voice to the growing criticism of the peculiar fashions, the current orthodoxies in the social sciences. He criticizes the retreat from morality and the reliance on subsidy. He says, quote, "It would seem that the retreat from morality by science is now full. For the dominant view in social science today is that social scientists might well learn from natural scientists how to achieve a new social status derivative from what can be subsidized rather than from what requires investigation." He criticizes social scientists for surrendering their birthright as analysts and critics of social structures and for having become hired men doing little jobs for corporations, fundraising associations, magazines interested in market research, and oddments of American culture. More importantly, he says, quote, "Nor should sociologists continue to be solicitors of funds from agencies who tell them what they want research done on. Sociologists should make it possible to get funds for research without selling their souls. The ideology of our so-called applied social research," let me redo that bit. "The ideology of our so-called applied social research people appears to be the same as that of the foundations or corporations who give them money." Huh. How about that? So exactly what I was saying at the beginning. Unless your interests and areas of expertise and research proposals align with the people doling out the cash, then you ain't getting no cash. But continuing with the quote, "Since many jobs are created this way, and jobs sometimes partly paid for with degrees attract graduate students and enhance sociology's respectability, any suggestion that this is the road to moral ruin sounds evangelical to those sociologists who have long lingered with Beelzebub." Simpson recommends the giving of unmarked grants to universities and to professional societies of sociologists to avoid domination by foundations. The difficulty, he remarks, is that neither universities nor societies have prepared adequately for such responsibility. Quote, "They have become so addicted to absentee ownership of social research that many sociologists would be unable to find any research to do unless somebody told them what he wanted done." From his liberal point of view, he argues that the subsidizers are afraid of dangerous topics, but he says that the scholars themselves and not those who supply research money should decide what research needs doing. Yeah, what a novel concept. The researchers should decide what to research. No. The people with the money should decide, obviously. What do the researchers know? Continuing. Simpson has this to say regarding the current preference for empirical research. Quote, "To be sure, empirical research is absolutely indispensable in reaching sociological conclusions, but empirical research today has become a magical phrase. If you say you are doing it, the gods bless you. Even if you are not doing it, it is still good to say you are. But sociologists must regain their respect for the necessity of sitting in an armchair long enough to know what they are going to do empirical research on, what their hypothesis is, whether it is worth prosecuting, what contribution to human knowledge they intend to make, and, simply, to make their ideas clear. Indeed, it may even be found profitable to read a book." Imagine that. "It is not good to attack a calculating machine or draw up a questionnaire with little in our heads. The pendulum has swung too far in one direction. It is time to re-synthesize learning and techniques, theory and research, education and thinking, morality and sociology, and even the social sciences." So the next section is the exclusion of the dissident. Dr. A. H. Hobbs of the University of Pennsylvania is a living example of the danger of criticizing foundations and foundation practices. He's only an assistant professor. He wryly calls himself the oldest assistant professor east of the Rockies. To the shame of his university, he has been told in no uncertain terms by his superiors there that he has no hope of rising in the hierarchy. Why? Because he is a dissident. The treatment of Professor Hobbes at the University of Pennsylvania is a black mark upon the record of that great institution. It is an outstanding example of suppression of academic freedom. Yet, as far as I know, none of the liberals who cry out so loudly that freedom is being suppressed whenever a communist professor is discharged have entered even the mildest protest against the persecution of Professor Hobbes, whose only sin has been to have an independent mind and the strength of character to use it. You see, that's what all the behavioral scientists and sociologists want to get rid of, the independent mind and the strength of character to use it, because it's all about predicting behavior, which is all about controlling behavior and figuring out if you can control it and you can predict it, then you don't have anything to worry about because you know what people are going to do, where they're going to go, how they're going to react, and then you can steer people wherever you want to steer them. But that individual with the independent mind who stands up and points it out and resists and says no, has the strength of character to speak out and to be a thorn in the side or a spanner in the works, choose your favorite metaphor. That's what they want to get rid of through all this behaviorism and social conditioning, etc. But back to the book. Continuing, behind the persecution of Professor Hobbes and accountable for it lies the fact that the Foundation-supported concentration of power has been angered by his independence of mind and his frank criticism. He has been a strong critic of many of the methods used in contemporary social science research, methods which the Foundation complex has fostered. Professor Hobbes, in his book The Claims of Sociology, A Critique of Textbooks, published in 1951, and I got to come back, see if I can find that one later, analyzed more than 100 leading textbooks on sociology used in high schools and colleges. He discovered that practically all of them, in varying degrees, were slanted toward collectivism. I'm just looking for a little white card that I can put in this page so I can get back to it later. There we go. Wow. So he looked at 100 leading textbooks. So not just cherry-picking willy-nilly textbooks. He was looking at the main ones that were being taught. All of them, 100% of them, were slanted towards collectivism. Here's a quote. Only a few, 6, texts attempt to present an objective, integrated view of the principles and processes which characterize the economic institutions of the United States. Characteristically, the major portion of the treatment of economics is devoted to criticism, to emphasis on maldistribution of wealth and income, and to presentation of remedies or alternatives for prevailing economic principles and processes. The single point of view taken by virtually all the examined books was characterized by attacks on big business, adulation of big government, emphasis on maldistribution of wealth, even attributing to it the major cause for divorce, pleas for some sort of modernization of religion to eliminate its mysticism and relate to modern society, and the development of a humanitarian point of view. So that's going to be your Huxleyan humanism and the scientific humanism, which Julian Huxley said was the purpose and philosophy of UNESCO. This humanitarianism, says Professor Hobbes, involves, quote, lamentation about war, economic maldistribution, and individual unhappiness. It appears, however, to be secular, materialistic, short-term humanitarianism. It is, quote, liberal, if the term applies to doctrinaire criticisms of economic maldistribution, of inequalities between sexes, classes, and races, and of social controls which inhibit each person's full expression of his own personality. It is not completely liberal, however, if this term implies a tolerant historical perspective and a balanced and unbiased presentation of controversial issues in society. It is objective if this term applies only to critical emphasis against institutions and traditions. It is lacking in objectivity, however, in uncritical acceptance of platitudinous remedies and goals for society. It is scientific if this term includes a process of selection of only certain aspects of quantitative data and certain types of studies. It is not scientific if the term excludes the use of unverified hypotheses in proceeding from unwarranted assumptions to untenable conclusions. That is quite a scathing critique there. Professor Hobbes is not alone in these criticisms. Many eminent professors agree with him, but he has been one of those few who have had the courage to express their opinions. Those who dominate foundation-supported social science research profess to advocate freedom of opinion, but they do not encourage the expression of opinions contrary to their own. They profess to advocate controversy and assert their right to use foundation funds for its promotion. More often than not, however, it is but one side of a controversy that they wish heard when it has political implications, the side to the left. This is amazing. It's amazing that this book is nearly 70 years old now, and it's just describing the modern day, the present day, the same bias, left-leaning bias in our universities and institutions and organizations, the same one-sidedness, the same lack of objectivity, of the same lack of even-handed treatment of opposing views and opinions. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Frank says, it's incredible to me that independence of mind seems so derided in so-called science and the foundations, which seem to control funding for research. It is utterly closed-mindedness. Yes. And actually, this reminds me of a point mentioned earlier in the book where the author referred to William White, who wrote the book The Organization Man. And he was actually the guy who coined the term groupthink, if I'm not mistaken. And William White talked about, and in that section, either William White or Rene were talking about how the individual, because of the structure of foundations and the way they award their grant money, the individual scientist, the lone scientist, was very unlikely to be able to get any funding. Instead, he would have to team up and build a group of other scientists, and they would prepare their proposal, I suppose, together. And the problem of this is the same problem that's laid out in the book by William White, which is called The Organization Man, which is that when you get groups and organizations and you have a lot of people coming together under one umbrella for a purpose, the effect of that is to stamp out what William White called the individual genius. So you won't get your breakthrough genius individuals in those kinds of situations. And so if an Isaac Newton or an Einstein or an Oppenheimer, or regardless of what you think, I'm just pulling well-known names out of history here, Da Vinci, if they came along to the foundations and wanted some funding, they'd probably be told to like get stuffed and bugger off, go join a group of scientists somewhere and fall in line with this bias and this prejudice against certain things, namely tradition and the established institutions. So it's amazing because on one hand, we're told to laud and worship these individual heroes of the past who stood up and were loyal to their discoveries and beliefs and changed paradigms because they wouldn't accept the dominant paradigm. And yet in our own time, anybody who does that is bullied, is sacked, is might be the victim of a character assassination. They have their reputations destroyed, and it's a real contradiction that in the past we worship the people and celebrate the people who did it in the past, but not in the present day. In the present day, it's groupthink and fall in line and do what everyone else does, and it's collectivism. And so when he's telling us here that all these textbooks were subtly or not so subtly promoting collectivism, We are living now through the result of that. We are living through what happens when collectivism gets into the schools and into the textbooks and into universities and into the minds of young people, and they go on to their jobs and to inhabit roles in the institutions, whether that's business or political or educational or whatever. We're in that collectivist sort of milieu that is being created by this foundation money and the liberal progressives that it was funding. So quite amazing. Back to the text. Professor Hobbes is a sociologist. He is brilliant and exceptionally well informed. He is given to independent thought, a precious commodity in our society. But he pays the price of independence. He supports his family on the salary of a labourer. He stands as one of the object lessons to academicians. Conform or be damned. There's a little footnote here. Professor Hobbes's persecution is described in E. Merrill Root's Collectivism on the Campus. That's another book we'll have to look for. And also is referred to in an article in the April 18th, 1956 issue of the National Review by Russell Kirk, in which the latter said, quote, "Sociology is thoroughly dominated by an entrenched orthodoxy, an orthodoxy which will not tolerate an independent mind, such as Professor Hobbes's." So we got 2 new books to find now in the space of 2 pages. What can you do? The hazards and the risks of running a YouTube channel about books is when you read them, you discover there's loads more books that you got to buy. Frank says, in my world of work days in engineering, oftentimes a group of people identified as a mastermind group would be formed for the purpose of problem solving. It was critical that each particular came. Like each different person showed up, right? Masterminds can definitely be useful. Yeah, I'm not saying that... I'm just saying groupthink can't exist without a group. That's what I'm saying. So it's absolutely possible for individuals who are to work together and to still get things done and to not fall into groupthink, but it's way more likely to happen. And if you only fund groups of people and your funding has a bias that is well known and you are flagging what it is that you want to put your money into ahead of time, then you're controlling what it works, right? You're controlling what the group's going to do, what it's going to work on. Oh, you hadn't finished your point there, Frank. It was critical that each particular came from a different occupational background so that lateral thinking would be inherent in the group. Yes, got you. Open-mindedness and the freedom to use it. Yeah. So if you can get people from different disciplines together, and you can all listen to each other, and you can all benefit from each other's expertise, there's no reason why working in a group couldn't be beneficial and productive and preferred. Absolutely. Oh, hang on. We didn't finish this page. We just went down to the asterisk. So we're on Foundation Fostered Scientism. Professor Hobbes testified before the Rees Committee that the many millions of dollars poured annually into social science research by some of the large foundations and their satellites or interlocked organizations, such as the Social Science Research Council, are largely wasted and unproductive of anything substantial or useful. But the waste involved was not his most severe criticism. He gave example after example of such research which offered a direct danger to our society. Right? So it's not just benign, oh, the money's being wasted. It's like, no, what's being done here is actually dangerous. What goes under the name of social science today is often quackery. It is what Professor Hobbes called scientism. Oh, okay, so Professor Hobbes is the originator of our term scientism. I didn't know that. That is good to know. That's a nice little nugget to drop on people and remind them. So continuing. Underlying the prevailing approach to research and teaching in the social sciences is the concept that social problems can be solved in the same manner as some physical problems by a scientific method. obviously enough, the collection of certain kinds of empirical data can be of enormous value. But overindulgence in the concept that there is a scientific solution for social problems, an overindulgence which some of the foundations have closely fostered, produces absurdity and peril. Professor Hobbes pointed out that the solution of social problems invariably involves the integration of intangible factors such as love, patriotism, sentiment, and other elements which cannot be measured with calipers, a slide rule, or an adding machine. But they can, right? Because love is just hormones in the body and secretions from the glands, and it's just all going on inside you. It's just chemistry and biology, isn't it? That's all that love is, right? Of course you can measure that. Patriotism, that's just same thing. Hormones, just something that goes on inside you when you see a flag or a picture of Orange Man or whatever it might be that triggers it. Apple pie, top hat and umbrella, I suppose, or a pint of Guinness. Continuing, the jury tapping project financed by the Ford Foundation, conducted in connection with a sociological project of the University of Chicago, illustrates the danger of overindulgence in the empirical approach. The problem of the project, I suppose, was to determine whether or not the jury system could be improved. To go about this by eavesdropping on juries to find out how they deliberate is fact-finding of a nature which is extremely dangerous. The term facts in itself is misused by the over-anxious empirical researcher. Of what value is the well-known fact that jurymen spend part of their time discussing the baseball scores and that much of their argument would hardly do on a debating team? Have these facts any scientific fact value? Are we to conclude, through a collection of such facts, that jurymen are not competent to fulfill the function which our legal system has assigned to them? Are such facts to be the basis of a plea that we should in some way control juries to make them more attentive to duty, or screen them to confine jury duty to those with a high IQ? The jury tapping procedure was an abortive attempt to solve a problem through empirical science. If juries are to be abolished or the jury procedure radically amended, it should be only after a most careful reconsideration of the historical origins and the philosophical rationale of the jury as an institution, and not upon the basis of statistical fact collection by eavesdroppers. It may well be that the jury system as it stands should be most carefully preserved, even though jurymen represent only a cross-section of intelligence, and even if jurymen do waste time discussing baseball. That's a really good point that he's making there. Is you could do a study, gather some data, put it into a nice pie chart, and then present it and say, oh, look, this data shows that we need to dismantle this long-standing, long-running aspect of our society. And I think in this day and age, we're very gung-ho at barreling into some whatever is new, whatever is labeled as progress. You know, it probably won't be long here in 2026 until we've got AI juries or judges, or some sort of automated agents doling out fines and punishments and sentences. We're going into that agentic state, as it has been described. And part of that is to get rid of juries. So it's quite prescient and ahead of its time that he's focusing on this particular study. But we abandon old, established ways of doing things at our peril. Not always, not in all instances, but just to throw it out because it's old. You know, they say out with the old and in with the new. Well, I mean, that even feeds back to what we were saying earlier about the young people being divided from the old people and not looking to them for wisdom and for life lessons and for knowledge about the world and how it works, and understanding about themselves and how best to proceed, right? Out with the old. Get the old out of there. Bring the new in. Bring GPT in. Oh, I've got a problem. I'll talk to GPT. I'm not going to talk to my parents or my grandparents or my aunties or my uncles. Let's see what GPT has to say. And of course, GPT is riddled with ideology funded by the foundations, no doubt. But yeah, another very thought-provoking section. Whoop. So next we got the social engineers and the fact-finding mania. The social scientists who have followed the course which has been so widely encouraged with foundation money have become hypnotized, it seems, by the title of scientists which they have misappropriated. They have concluded that only social scientists can solve our social problems. They have made themselves into an elite. They have called themselves social engineers. They have been touched with the Führer complex. They have become convinced that they are qualified to lead us into better pastures. How? Through the scientific method. The Rees Committee found many expressions of this elite social engineering concept among social scientists, writers, and publicists. Dr. Pendleton Herring, president of the Social Science Research Council, expressed it this way in an article in the SSRC Items of March 1947. Quote, "One of the greatest needs in the social sciences is for the development of skilled practitioners who can use social data for the cure of social ills as doctors use scientific data to cure bodily ills. The social doctors have acquired a fact-finding mania. They have gone overboard on empiricism. Trying to imitate the use of the empirical method as one of the necessary tools of natural science, they have all too often forgotten that the natural scientist deals with measurable facts while the social scientist can measure comparatively little. That the natural scientist sets up conditional hypotheses and tests them through experiment, while the social scientist can hardly experiment with human beings outside of a totalitarian concentration camp." Great point. That's why so many of those get set up, and I'm sure will be set up again in the future. Valuable data. Look at all those facts. Think about all those facts we can gather if we just lock a bunch of people in a concentration camp. It's been done. It's been done many times. As Professor Hobbes put it in his Social Problems and Scientism, quote, "An overemphasis on facts as facts is one of the characteristics of what is sometimes called the empirical approach. Ideally, empiricism could mean that the investigators relied solely upon controlled observation and experimental evidence. Actually, much of the empiricism in social science involves no rigid experimentation, and the facts are questionable, fragmentary, and slanted. Empiricism in social science seems to owe its extreme popularity more nearly to desperation rather than plan. Philosophic and scientific justification for the type of empiricism generally employed in social science is extremely tenuous. It seems to spring more from a frantic effort to acquire the external appearance of science and the accolade of practicality than to grow out of any carefully thought-out system of either philosophy or science. A belief appears to exist that somehow empiricism is more advanced, more modern than reliance on reason and logic, such as rationalism involves." In his Fads and Foibles in Modern Sociology, Professor Sorokin blasts the illusion of operationalism and the measuring phobia in social science research. Among his most devastating arguments against the excessive use of the empirical approach is the following, quote, "If the operationalists had really studied how an overwhelming majority of the most important scientific discoveries, technological inventions, the greatest religious, philosophical, and technical verities, and the highest artistic achievements really originated and grew, they would have learned, first, that they were born in intuition. Second, that the intuitional idea was developed and elaborated by logical and mathematical thought, which was used in making all the necessary deductions or consequences from the intuitional or postulational principle. And finally, that in the field of science, these deductions were tested by, again, rationally devised experimental, inductive, or operational method." And again, so another quote here. "To abandon intuitional insight and logical thought in favor of operational method would amount to castrating creative thought generally and in science particularly. Without intuition and logic, no real progress in science, religion, philosophy, ethics, and the fine arts has been or will be possible." Professor Sorokin ridicules the wide use of the poll-taking method of operation, calling it unscientific, vague, indeterminate, and more often than not, hearsay in its product. It's a great point. Bear that in mind when they come on the news and or you read in a newspaper, or a poll has shown that 75% of Brits are in favour of higher taxes, or that kind of nonsense that they trot out all the time. Polls, they are unscientific, vague, indeterminate, and they are hearsay. Professor Sorokin has another quote here. Even their hearsay material is ordinarily collected not by the investigators themselves, but by their assistants and hired pollsters. Imagine physicists or chemists operating in this fashion, and then tabulating the collected opinions and giving the results in the form of various statistical tables and other paraphernalia to point to the objectivity of their scientific and operational techniques. Moreover, says Professor Sorokin, what is true or false cannot be decided by majority vote. Now there's a quote and a half. What is true or false cannot be decided by majority vote. It's the kind of quote that makes you feel really glad you live in a liberal democracy, doesn't it? The tidal wave of the quantitative empirical method of research is now so high, says Professor Sorokin, that the contemporary stage of the psychosocial sciences can be properly called the age of quantophobia and numerology. The comptometer compulsion, the fact-finding mania of these foundation-supported social scientists induce them to accept the principle of moral relativity, that moral laws are only relative. The facts speak for themselves and must dictate moral law. Whatever the facts disclose is right. So there you go. Foundations fund social sciences, scientists, and this leads to moral relativity because they only take into account things you can measure, and the things you can't measure don't exist in this paradigm. The accepted moral law must be taken into consideration in any attempt to find socially acceptable solutions to social problems. As Professor Rowe testified, ideas and concepts and values are far more important. I'll do that again. Ideas and concepts and values are far more important than much of the indisputable, completely non-controversial, factual material that political scientists seem to occupy themselves with so much in the present day. But the social engineers who are dedicated to engineering us into better ways reject this principle. Thus, if Dr. Kinsey concludes that girls would be happier in the long run if their marriages were preceded by considerable and even unusual sex experience, then, say these social engineers, the moral and legal concepts which proscribe it should be abandoned. Nor, say these social engineers, are any political principles to be accepted as basic. If, for example, a function can be more efficiently exercised by the federal government than by the individual states, it should be so exercised, regardless of the principle of limited federal jurisdiction, which is fundamental to our system and is our greatest protection against totalitarianism. Nor, inasmuch as social scientists deem themselves exclusively competent, are political principles to be determined by such incompetence as lawyers, doctors, farmers, and businessmen. As the Social Science Research Council said in its statement filed with the Rees Committee, the social scientists, quote, command the analytical methods for most effectively getting at such questions in basic and tangible terms. Pretty confident in themselves, aren't they? And its 1927 report included among its aims, quote, to make possible the substituting of more scientific social control for the rule of thumb methods which men have happened upon in their effort to live together. One more quotation, again from Dr. Herring, the president of the Social Science Research Council, in its first issue of Items. Quote, Here we wish simply to emphasize that in our generation, efforts are being made to arrange and control human relationships more consciously, more deliberately, and it is to be hoped more responsibly than during the last century. I'll just read that again. Here we wish simply to emphasize that in our generation, efforts are being made to arrange and control human relationships more consciously, more deliberately, and it is to be hoped more responsibly than during the last century. This is hubris on a galactic scale. It's amazing. Continuing with that quote, an interdependent world is being forced to an awareness of the limitations of individual freedom and personal choice. That quote would have been good if he'd have just said an interdependent world is being forced, full stop. Because it was, and it has been. But an interdependent world is being forced to an awareness of the limitations of individual freedom and personal choice. Just amazing. What a quote. I've got to underline it. In our generation. So your relationships are being arranged and controlled deliberately, more consciously, because you can't do it yourself. Individuals just can't make up their own minds about how to conduct themselves in relationships. It's because it never worked in the past, did it? Isn't it just there were no successful relationships in the past, so these social scientists got to stick their mucky fingers in. Or clean fingers, I suppose. I suppose they've got like sterile, pristine fingers that have been scrubbed multiple times, and they're probably wearing those disgusting latex gloves that feel horrible to the touch, right? And make me sort of cringe. That's the kind of people that they are. I'd rather hang out with the people who have mucky fingers, to be honest. Continuing, with these quotations, we can now finally understand the theory of the social engineers in the Ford Foundation who approved of eavesdropping on juries, right? Just sneaky, nosy little people. They're voyeurs. They just want to be in other people's business. Just nosy. It's just nosiness, but there's something more to it as well, because eavesdropping, or for me, it feels uncomfortable. If I overhear something and I don't think I should be listening to it, I'll get away from that. I don't want to have the weight of that on me if I hear something that I then have to go and pretend I didn't hear, because I don't like to bullshit people in that way of misleading, right? If that makes sense. So I don't want to be anywhere near that. But there's some other people who'll be like, oh yeah, let me in. Let's go and listen to it all. Because then it gives you a sort of sense of, I suppose, power over somebody. Like, oh, I know your dirty little secrets. You know, I've been eavesdropping, and now I know the juicy details. But that's an invasion of privacy, right? And that's just a right that we all have, is the right to privacy and private conversations, and particularly in the case of a jury. But, you know, you can think of examples in your everyday life when you're living with your family or your flatmates, or working with your colleagues in the office, whatever. There's plenty of situations where there's conversations going on. And what do you do in those situations? You know, that'll tell you a lot about your moral character, for sure. Frank says, ears wide shut. That would be Kubrick's sequel that he never got to make, because he sadly died right at the end of making Eyes Wide Shut. Nothing suspicious about that at all. Totally natural. So let's carry on here with page 95. Continuing. With these quotations, we can now finally understand the theory of the social engineers in... Oh, I just read that section, sorry, that sentence. Those in charge of the jury project, continuing, were dealing with an aged institution, the jury, which had been adopted by our society through rule-of-thumb methods and not by the scientific method of which the social engineers were allegedly capable. True, the jury is one of our fundamental protections, almost universally approved by our lawyers, jurists, statesmen, legislatures, and public. But these are not scientists. Only the social scientists are capable of understanding whether the jury system is sound or not. This they can determine by getting at the facts. So they were getting at the facts by violating the privacy of jurors. To make this situation doubly clear, I shall quote once more from the Social Science Research Council because it is, more or less, the guiding spirit in social science research. Its 1928-1929 report discloses one of its purposes. Quote, a sounder empirical method of research had to be achieved in political science if it were to assist in the development of a scientific political control. It's quite important out loud, isn't it? Scientific political control. It's a good point, actually. You know, there's a lot of things that the word science gets tacked onto where really it's not a science, or it has no, science, as you mentioned earlier, there's natural science, and that whole process of forming a hypothesis and designing the experiments and carrying them out and all that sort of stuff. But you can't apply science to certain aspects of reality and certain particularly intangible things. Like you use the example of love, but I'm thinking of a good friend of mine who's he's not into, but he is an Orthodox Christian. And a large part of Orthodoxy, as I understand it in my inexpert terms, and I haven't read widely on it or anything, but a large part of that is to account for and help people along a more spiritual path, to enhance the side of them which is not measurable, which isn't physical, right? The spiritual, the soul, these things that are intangible, these things that you can't see and touch and hold, but nevertheless seem to exist and seem to be critically important parts of life as a human being in this place. For some of us. Some of us are content to just be monkeys with smartphones, apparently, but, that's a separate conversation. But let's go back to this. So you've got, political science is my point, and you've got social science, and I'm sure there are other examples that I can't think of right now, but they think by sticking the word science on the end of it that they can turn it into a discipline of some sort that then has to be respected and funded, obviously, by the foundations, that they can get money for, just because they've put the word science on there and said, yeah, it's a science. We're doing science. Don't ask too many. They're just bugging. They're just sticking microphones in juries' deliberation rooms and eavesdropping on them like, oh yeah, it's science. Don't worry about it. It's just science. This is what I mean about scientism, and this is such a fantastic chapter. I'm really enjoying it so far. But it blinds people. People just think, they see the word science, they see the white lab coat, and they think, true, has to be true, because they have a belief and a faith in that thing. And they have no idea how the conclusion was reached or what the experiments were or the coding that went into the computer model that spits out the scary looking graph. They just see big numbers, and they see some sort of visual representation of data, and they go, science, oh my God, better stop eating meat and having children. Okay, continuing. Political control is thus to be left in the hands of the elite, the social engineers. What the people want is not necessarily good for them. They are not competent to decide. No, of course we aren't. Us plebs down here, what do we know? The Führers must decide it for them so that we can have a scientifically based and intelligent society. The Reese Committee report quoted a distinguished professor, Dr. Carl O. Sauer of the University of California. Quote, in American social science, it has indeed become a dominant folk way to associate progress with putting the job inquiry into large-scale organizations under formally prescribed methods and with limited objectives. Having adopted the name science, we are impressed by the method of science as inductive, quantitative, experimental. We are even told that such is the only proper method. This eminent academician minced no words in discussing the part played by the complex composed of certain of the foundations and intermediary organizations concerned with direct research, such as the Social Science Research Council. He said, quote, "A serious and delicate problem is posed by the growing role of the National Research Council and Foundation, the last years having seen a continually increasing concentration of influence. And, he said, social scientists have developed, quote, hierarchies of conference members who speak a common language, obscured from us by its own ceremonial terms. They become an elite, fashioning increasingly the directions and limits of our work as they become more and more removed from the producers." The Foundation's supported concept of social engineering, with its political implications, was castigated by Professor Sauer in these words, quote, "Research programs are set up in terms of social goals, and it is assumed that professional training provides the deep insight needed. Having set up schools for the training of prophets, it gratifies us to hear that the great task of social science is to remake the world." Among the material used by the committee were letters received from three of the leading sociologists of today, Professor Tirim A. Sorokin of Harvard, Professor Carl C. Zimmerman of Harvard, and Professor James H. S. Bossard of Pennsylvania. Professor Zimmerman went so far as to say, quote, "The tax-exempt foundations in the United States have unfairly and undesirably emphasized empirical research to such an extent that the whole meaning of social science research has come to be ridden with sham and dubious practices." Professor Sorokin said, "The futility of excessively favoring this sort of research particularly is well demonstrated by its sterility. In spite of the many millions of dollars, enormous amount of time and energy expended by the research staffs, almost all of the enormous mass of research along this line in the United States of America for the last 25 or 30 years has not produced either any new significant social theory, or any new method, or any new technique, or any scientifically valid test, or even any limited causal uniformity." Wow, that's quite a damning review there. Continuing, Professor Sorokin's judgment of the sterility of most foundation-supported social science research is supported by an address, New Concepts in Education, by Dr. Stuart A. Curtis, made to the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1950, part of which is quoted in the Reese Committee report. Quote, "As a result, we are today in possession of mountains of quantitative data whose interpretation is not furthered by our experiments, and we have discovered no laws as the exact sciences no law. We possess only large masses of quantitative conclusions, nearly worthless for purposes of prediction." Excuse me, I just had to sneeze there. Referring to the mass production of research, Professor Sorokin has said, "The research factories manufacturing such products have become the dominant industry of sociological and psychological research. Their products are manufactured on a mass scale, moving along the assembly line almost as mechanically as automobiles. As a result, scientific journals, texts, and monographs are filled mainly with this sort of research. Its total volume has already become so large that nobody, except the all-remembering, all-indexing, and all-tabulating electronic robot, can know, remember, and use this cosmic mass of research." It's funny that he said that back then. Nowadays we actually have access to, the elites have access to the all remembering, all indexing, and all tabulating electronic robot. I mean, he was kind of saying it sarcastically there, but fast forward 70 years and you do have these gigantic data centers running these programs that can tabulate and crunch all that data and numbers and information in real time. So maybe they knew it was coming. Maybe they wanted to just prepare people for gathering and collecting all this data and information and snooping and eavesdropping. Isn't that what all these devices do? We know that we talk about things and then the next thing there's an ad for that product or service or location that we discussed, the privacy of our own homes. So we know we're being spied on. We know we're being surveilled. We know that everything is recorded. Somebody's listening to it. Is it a human? Probably not at the moment. It's probably some sort of agentic AI giving you a wrong think score that will block you the next time you want to, I don't know, get a mortgage, buy a plane ticket. Who knows? Who knows what they'll roll it out with first. But yeah, that bit is quite prescient, although I'm sure he didn't know he was being prescient. Continuing with the quote, human scholars and scientists can hardly master it. After all, human memory is limited and human life is too short. Moreover, it is not certain whether these products are worth remembering. Many real scholars refuse to waste their time and energy in plodding through miles and miles of this monotonous research. Preoccupation with this time and fund-consuming research leaves little time for the researchers to study more important socio-cultural phenomena or to acquaint themselves with the vast fund of real knowledge accumulated by hundreds of eminent social thinkers. In this research industry, the researchers have hardly any time even for seriously thinking about the problems studied, and still less time for cultivating intuition or incisive rational thought, or for developing their minds generally. As a result of this mechanized research industry, we have a vast army of research factory hands who, in the terms of Lao Tzu, are never wise men, while wise men are never researchers. No wonder, therefore, that this vast army has not enriched our knowledge by many new discoveries or verities. Professor Bossert expressed his concern over the effect that the recent emphasis by foundations on the comptometer approach would have upon research. He wrote, quote, the monies and influence of the large foundations naturally do a great deal to set the norms of professional acceptance in a given field. And it is in this respect difficult to measure statistically, but possibly of very great importance, that a distinct disservice may be done to sociological research by an undue emphasis upon any particular emphasis or methodology. Strange sentence there. Just give me a second. I'll be back in one moment. Nose was running a bit there. I'm loving how many quotes are packed into this chapter. It was a good idea for them to, or for Wormser, I suppose, to write a book and put all the juiciest, most interesting and revealing quotes into the book so that we wouldn't have to wade through however many thousands of pages actually make up the Reese Committee report itself. So thank you very much, Rene Wormser. Another quote from Professor Sorokin. In the raging epidemic of quantophrenia, everyone can be researchers and scientific investigators because everyone can take a few sheets of paper, fill them with all sorts of questions, mail the questionnaires to all possible respondents, receive the answered copies, classify them in this or that way, process them through a tabulating machine, arrange the results into several tables with all the mechanically computed percentages, coefficients, or correlation, chi-squared indices, standard deviations, and probable errors, and then write a paper or a book filled with the most impressive array of tables, formulae, indices, and other evidence of objective, thorough, precise, quantitative research. These are typical rights in contemporary quantitative research in sociology, psychology, and other psychosocial sciences. Hence the rising tide of quantophrenic studies in these disciplines. The nemesis of such simulacra is sterility and error, and this nemesis is already walking abroad among the contemporary psychosocial sciences. Similar statements were made by various academicians who were reluctant to have their names disclosed for fear of reprisal from the Foundation world. Wow. So, like, the Foundation money is so big, so coveted, that people were scared to speak out in the same way as some of these people have been doing, these quotes we've been reading, because their income, their livelihood depends on securing that foundation money, and that foundation money depends on them doing this quantophrenic method of research, which is just surveying and polling people. Because we all know that everyone tells the truth in surveys and polls, don't we? Back to the text, continuing. One renowned professor of economics whose teachings conflict with the ruling interventionist school, a man of worldwide prestige and of independent thought, stated to me that no student of his could get a grant from any of the foundations which form part of the complex which the Rees Committee referred to as a concentration of power, because he does not follow the comptometer school of research which the major foundations promote. The nonconformists and their students stand little chance of receiving support for research from those foundations which have delegated the selection of grant recipients to professional councils which are strictly controlled by majorities adhering to the current orthodoxies. It is no wonder that so much sterility has resulted in social science research fields. There is little controversy in such kept science. Researchers work in a foundation-created climate which offers rewards for conformity and the penalty of abandonment for dissent. The degrading effect of this upon the academic world accounts for the general sterility of social science research in the United States. Okay. Now we've got a juicy section coming up that I am very much looking forward to reading. Frank says, page 99, that's some quote. Yes. I mean, this, I would just highlight this whole chapter. It's all good. But now we're going to learn about Rockefeller finances Dr. Kinsey's scientism. Professor Hobbes rightly asserted that social scientists should exercise the greatest care in informing the public when their work is not truly scientific. The very term social science implies that their conclusions are unassailable because they are scientifically arrived at. There is the constant danger, then, that laymen will take these conclusions as axiomatic bases for social action. Perhaps the best illustration of this is the remarkable number of writings which appeared after the publication of the reports on the Rockefeller Foundation-supported Kinsey studies. There's a footnote here. It's quite a big one, so probably worth reading. The Rockefeller Foundation's statement filed with the committee explained its connection with the Kinsey studies in this way. In 1931, it became interested in systematic support for studies in sexual physiology and behavior. It had become increasingly interested in the life sciences and less in the physical sciences. And, it continued, support for studies in reproductive physiology and behavior constituted an obviously necessary part of this program, since the ability to reproduce is one of the elementary characteristics of living organisms. The thing is, like, why do you need to study it, though? Is it going wrong? Haven't we made it this far? However many generations of people have come and gone. I think we've got it figured out. Oh, but oh no, we need to study it because, it's, reproduction is important, and but sexual behavior, we need to study it. Which just means some perverts want to do the same thing that the social scientists did to the people on the jury, and they want to eavesdrop. Or even better, they want to sit there behind a one-way mirror and get a good eyeful. That's what it sounds like to me. Continuing with the footnote here. Its work in these areas was chiefly in connection with the Committee for Research in Problems of Sex of the National Research Council, to which, by 1954, the Foundation had granted $1.755 million in annual grants, running from $75,000 to $240,000. Beginning about 1941, a considerable portion of these funds was supplied to Dr. Kinsey's studies, and one grant was made direct to Dr. Kinsey. The NRC grants to these studies were with the knowledge and approval of the Foundation. The work of the NRC produced some results of truly noteworthy importance and great value to the society in the field of physiology. I intend no criticism of the Foundation's grants insofar as they were used for physiological studies, but the much publicized bestseller Kinsey Studies base an advocacy of criminal and social reform on the very unscientific material which Dr. Kinsey had collected and permitted to be widely disseminated. So we go back to the text here. With the assumedly scientific character of Dr. Kinsey's work behind us, we had such good things offered to the public as this by one Anne G. Freegood in the September 1953 issue of Harper's. Quote, "The desert in this case is our current code of laws governing sexual activities and the background of Puritan tradition regarding sex under which this country still to some extent operates." Later on, she wrote that the first Kinsey report, quote, "has already been cited in court decisions and quoted in textbooks, as well as blazoned from one end of the country to the other." Professor Hobbs, in Social Problems and Scientism, described the aftermath of Dr. Kinsey's Rockefeller Foundation-supported first report as follows. Despite the patent limitations of the study and its persistent bias, its conclusions regarding sexual behavior were widely believed. They were presented to college classes. Medical doctors cited them in lectures. Psychiatrists applauded them. A radio program indicated that the findings were serving as a basis for revision of moral codes relating to sex, and an editorial in a college student newspaper admonished the college administration to make provision for sexual outlets for the students in accordance with the scientific realities as established by the book. Some of the Kinseyites have said that our laws are wrong because they do not follow the biological facts. Published reports, such as those of Kinsey, can do immeasurable harm when they falsely pretend to disclose biological facts. A great part of the Kinsey product is without basis in true fact and is mere propaganda for some personally intriguing concepts. Professor Hobbs pointed out that Dr. Kinsey ridiculed socially approved patterns of sexual behavior, calling them rationalizations, while usually referring to socially condemned forms of sexual behavior as normal or normal in the human animal. This presentation, said Professor Hobbs, could give the impression, and it gave the impression to a number of viewers, that things which conform to the socially approved codes of sexual conduct are rationalizations, not quite right, while things which deviate from it, such as homosexuality, are normal, in a sense, right. Professor Hobbs stressed the fact that such pseudoscientific presentations could seriously affect public morality. Here is part of his testimony. Quote, "For an illustration, in connection with the question of heterosexuality compared with homosexuality, Kinsey in the first volume has this statement, quote, 'It's only because society demands that there be a particular choice in the matter, and does not so often dictate one's choice of food or clothing.' He puts it in these terms, 'It is just a custom which society demands.' In the second volume, it is stressed, for example, that we object to adult molesters of children primarily because we have become conditioned against such adult molesters of children, and that the children who are molested become emotionally upset, primarily because of the old-fashioned attitudes of their parents about such practices, and the parents, the implication is, are the ones who do the real damage by making a fuss about it if a child is molested. Because the molester," and here I quote from Kinsey, quote, "may have contributed favorably to their later socio-sexual development." That is, a molester of children may have actually, Kinsey contends, not only not harmed them, but may have contributed favorably to their later socio-sexual development. Especially emphasized in the second volume, the volume on females, is the supposed beneficial effect of premarital sexual experiences. Such experiences, Kinsey states, provide an opportunity for the females to learn to adjust emotionally to various types of males. That is on page 266 of the volume on females. In addition, on page 327, he contends that premarital sexual experience may well contribute to the effectiveness of one's other non-sexual social relationships, and that many females, this is on page 115, will thus learn how to respond to socio-sexual contacts. On page 328, that it should contribute to the development of emotional capacities in a more effective way than if sexual experiences are acquired after marriage. The avoidance of premarital sexual experience by females, according to Professor Kinsey, may lead to inhibitions, which damage the capacity to respond so much that these inhibitions may persist after years of marriage, if indeed they are ever dissipated. That is from page 330. So you get a continued emphasis on the desirability of females engaging in premarital sexual behavior. In both these volumes, there is a persistent emphasis, a persistent questioning of the traditional codes and the laws relating to sexual behavior. Professor Kinsey may be correct or he may be incorrect, but when he gives the impression that the findings are scientific in the same sense as the findings in the physical science, then the issue becomes not a matter of whether he as a person is correct or incorrect, but of the impression which is given to the public, which can be quite unfortunate. That was a long quote, but I think it was necessary to get all that down. So yeah, this is the issue is not whether or not he's right. It's about presenting things as scientifically proven, knowing that a bunch of people are just going to like run with it, and they'll say, "Well, see, Kinsey came, he showed us the graph, he's got the data, he's got the facts, and therefore it's a good thing for women to go out and have lots of premarital sex." And it just gets presented as fact to scientifically illiterate people, of which I am one. And then because scientism is a religion and the priests are the men with the lab coats, people will just believe anything they say, like they used to believe anything that the priests with the black coats would say. It's the same technique, only instead of long black flowing robes, they're long white lab coats now. But continuing, the special responsibility of the Rockefeller Foundation for having financed the Kinsey bestsellers comes sharply to roost in this quotation from an article by Albert Deutsch in Harper's. So startling are its revelations, so contrary to what civilized man has been taught for generations, that they would be unbelievable but for the impressive weight of the scientific agencies backing the survey. So if Kinsey had just done all this himself and didn't have the weight of the Rockefeller Foundation and the funding behind him and presented this information, people would say, that's unbelievable, we're not having it, and they wouldn't have gone along with it. That's what it sounds like. Continuing, note how impressive is the word scientific, and how false. How dangerous to society if foundations support the theory that social problems can be scientifically solved by mere interviewing techniques. Apart from the doubtful veracity of the samples of men and women questioned by Kinsey, his statistical methods have been seriously criticized by organs of the American Statistical Association and several scholarly reviewers. But even if the sampling had been representative of American attitudes on sex, and even if all the persons interviewed had been willing to give truthful answers and were psychologically capable of doing so, it seems preposterous to propose that social change should be justified upon empirical inquiry alone. Should concepts of value, legal, religious, ethical ideas be abandoned merely because any number of men find them oppressive and neglect to live up to them? Are we justified in advocating a change in the criminal law because certain types of crimes are practiced widely? Shall we abrogate punishment for speeding, for theft, for adultery, for fraudulent voting, for income tax evasion, if we find that such illegalities are practiced by a majority? By 20% of our people? By 80%? What percentage of our population must express itself either by response to interviews or by action in favor of an illegality to convince a social scientist that the law prescribing it should be abrogated? Similar questions might be asked in relation to the weighing of existing ethical concepts such as patriotism, respect for parents and elders, and tolerance of dissidents. That was a great paragraph just there. The basic fallacy, continuing, of the Kinsey approach and that of the ruling research clique in the social sciences stems from a confusion between what is a fact, what is an expression of opinion, and what is an a priori concept of value. The puerile doctrine that change is always necessary has led many of these scientists to believe that there are no longer any inalienable rights, no longer any unchanging duties. They deem themselves justified, with the support of foundation grants, to label their prejudices as truth and to experiment with society. The Rees Committee report puts it thus, quote, "It seems to this committee that there is a strong tendency on the part of many of the social scientists whose research is favored by the major foundations toward the concept that there are no absolutes, that everything is indeterminate, that no standards of conduct, morals, ethics, and government are to be deemed inviolate, that everything, including basic moral law, is subject to change, and that it is the part of the social scientists to take no principle for granted as a premise in social or juridical reasoning, however fundamental it may heretofore have been deemed to be under our Judeo-Christian moral system." Another clangor of a quote there as well from the Rees Committee report itself. Okay. Let's see how much we got left for this chapter. It's a good one, though. Oh, we got loads left. Plenty to chew through. Look at that. It just goes on forever. Okay. This is the next chapter. I'm just going to scope out how many pages we're on. So we've got about 30 pages left. Might end up being a 3-hour broadcast after all. But if I get tired, I'm just going to stop somewhere at the end of a section. There's a lot of sections, so. Yeah, that last bit was great. So well written, so powerful, and it really gets to the root of the problem without tying us up in details or complex arguments or waffle. He really cuts to the core of what this committee discovered. And I think this chapter in particular is one that would be worth reviewing and getting very familiar with the points that he's making. Because scientism still rules, right? In the modern day. So the next section is The American Soldier, produced by the SSRC. Poll-taking has become one aspect of the fact-finding mania. Professor Hobbs testified regarding The American Soldier, a book prepared and edited under the auspices of the Social Science Research Council. He described the process by which social scientists, against the repeated objections of the military authorities, managed to incorporate their own ideas in a matter of highest military significance. This was the method of discharge to be used by the military forces at the end of hostilities in World War II. Most of these scientists were Foundation connected. Their work was praised by Frederick Osborne, a trustee of the Carnegie Corporation, as a typical example of social science prediction. What was this example? These scientists decided that men should be discharged individually from the army according to a table of weighted factors, and that these factors should be determined by taking a poll of the men themselves. In other words, regardless of military necessities, the men were to determine what weight should be given to length of service, frontline duty, and other factors in determining the order of release. The traditional method of demobilization called for the successive release of whole units from the armed forces, leaving unimpaired the strength of the remaining units. The method recommended by the social scientists, based upon alleged scientific findings, shattered the effectiveness of individual units. These scientists prevailed. As a result, there can be little doubt that if we had been forced into a resumption of hostilities, our army could have been reduced to a nadir of inefficiency, as the committee report put it. Quote, "The military policymakers were defeated by the social scientists. This was another victory in the struggle of the social engineers to gain control of all the throttles of control. A few more such victories for social engineering might indeed be fatal." In his statement filed with the Reese Committee, Mr. Charles Dollard, president of the Carnegie Corporation, defended the authors of The American Soldier, holding that our military forces themselves initiated the study and, inferentially, were responsible for the outcome. Obviously enough, the study could not have been made without express military authorization, but it is inconceivable that any truly military minds could have initiated the study, nor does that seem to have happened. The introduction to The American Soldier states that the officers responsible for advancing the project were General George C. Marshall and Brehan Somerville, but the actual officer in charge was General Frederick Osborne. General Osborne was no professional soldier. He had been a civilian, an official of a factoring company, and it is of no little consequence that he was a trustee of the Carnegie Corporation. He had achieved some attention in social science circles through various writings. His service in the army, where he rose to the rank of Major General, seems to have been confined to the non-military work of acting as director of the Information and Education Division, the unit through which the studies of demobilization methods were made. Among General Osborne's staff were Dr. Samuel A. Stouffer, director of the professional staff, Dr. Carl I. Hovland, and Dr. Leonard S. Cottrell, Jr., all identifiable as closely associated with the Social Science Research Council. In all probability, it was some of these men, or some of the employed consultants, who generated the idea of the study. A 2-page list of such consultants appears in the beginning of Volume 2 of The American Soldier. Many of these, in later reviews of the book, expressed unenthusiastic praise for the work to which they had contributed. Expressed enthusiastic praise. It would be strange for them to do unenthusiastic praise. The introduction boasts, quote, "Never before had modern methods of social science been employed on so large a scale by so competent technicians." It also said, quote, "The conservatism natural to professional men everywhere and often particularly ascribed to the professional soldier was broken down by the imaginative grasp of the abler leaders." It would be interesting to know the full story of how these leaders, if military men were meant, were sold this grasp. At any rate, while the book cites that even the president approved of the project, it states, quote, "The idea of a point system for demobilization had been conceived in the research branch. This branch of the armed forces was operated not by military men, but by social scientists. It is equally clear that there was powerful and consistent opposition to the point system from truly military men who realized how disastrous to our security the suggested discharge system could become. This point system contributed substantially to that grave weakness in our forces which left us unprepared for the Korean War, coming so soon after the close of World War II. Looking back, it is incredible that a group of so-called scientists could have been so blind to reality as to propose that military decisions be made through the process of finding out what the soldier in the ranks wanted. Moreover, the scientific value of this effort to justify a military decision by the poll-taking method has been questioned by many critics. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., a historian who is certainly not suspect of being a conservative, lashed out at the study in a review, The Statistical Soldier. He said, quote, "Too many obvious frauds were at last committed in the name of sociology. So the old and toothless beast was put out to pasture. In its place has come its more carnivorous son, known in more modest mood under some such name as social relations, or more often, in a tone of majestic simplicity, as social science. Well, the social science machinery has been grinding away for some years now. Occasionally, skeptics approach the devout and say with proper humility, "You have basked in the smile of the deans and in the favour of foundations. You are discovering the secret of the ages. We wish to share in the new enlightenment you are bringing us. But what, O wise one, should we read? Can you name a single book that would give some idea of the great revelations that lie in wait?" The oracle, at that point, used to become muffled. Then one began to hear of the American soldier. This work, one was told, was the real stuff. This would settle the doubts. Schlesinger continues, "Indeed, the more basic questions are raised not by relatively innocuous practice of social science, but by its mystique, its pretensions to no knowledge and new certitude. Most of the American soldier is a ponderous demonstration in newspeak of such facts as one can find described more vividly and with far greater psychological insight in a small book entitled Up Front by Bill Mauldin. What Mauldin may have missed will turn up in the pages of Ernie Pyle. Bursting onto university campuses after the war, overflowing with portentous if vague hints of mighty wartime achievements, not, alas, to be disclosed because of security. Fanatical in their zeal and shameless in their claims, the social scientists persuaded or panicked many university administrators into giving their studies priority. Needless to say, they scored an even more brilliant success with foundations. Certain foundation directors even decided that virtually all their funds for research in the social sciences should be expended on projects of the social science variety. The individual scholar, so far as they were concerned, was through. The whole is happily subsidized by the foundations, carrying to triumphant completion their ancient hope of achieving the bureaucratization of American intellectual life. And I'm sure we've come across Schlesinger before, but right now I can't remember where. Apart from his criticism of the underlying scientific faddism, Schlesinger considers The American Soldier a harmless book, but most of the social scientists, and perhaps General Marshall also, considered The American Soldier a monumental contribution to military policy and to the social sciences. In the words of Paul Lazarsfeld, one of the project's consultants, quote, "The results of both volumes are without parallel in the history of the social sciences." The American Soldier comprised 2 out of 4 volumes of a series, the Flyleaf says. The 4 volumes in this series were prepared and edited under the auspices of a special committee of the Social Science Research Council comprising a bunch of people. I won't read all their names out. The data on which these volumes are based were collected by the Research Branch, Information and Education Division, War Department, during World War II. In making the data available, the War Department assumes no responsibility for the analyses and interpretations contained in these volumes, which are the sole responsibility of the authors. These volumes were prepared under a grant from the Carnegie Corporation of New York. That corporation is not, however, the author, owner, publisher, or proprietor of the publication, and is not to be understood as approving by virtue of its grant any of the statements made or views expressed therein. This last reservation is typical of the method by which some foundations seek to use the risk capital theory and yet escape all responsibility for unhappy risk. In Items, the official publication of the Social Science Research Council issue of March 1949, an anonymous author boasts, quote, "The point system was actually invented by the research branch and sold to the Army on the basis of attitude studies made in all parts of the world. According to the SSRC, more than 500,000 soldiers were studied. These American soldiers were guinea pigs for social scientists to satisfy their curiosity and their penchant penchant. I don't know how you pronounce that actually. Penchant, it's French, isn't it? For statistical analysis. The American soldiers were guinea pigs. It's not the first time that's happened, won't be the last time, and it's not just the soldiers. Their persuasive promises of military benefits had sold the program to the authorities. This gave the associated professors jobs in Washington during the wartime and an opportunity to gain prestige for a mysterious contribution to the war effort. It also almost wrecked our military strength. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm getting a bit tired, and I'm not used to reading for so long these days. It means we got a good chunk to finish off in that chapter. But there's a lot. And I think we got through a good bit. We got quite a bit to chew on and think about tonight. The next section that's going to be coming up is Foundations Generate the Proper Study of Mankind. Oh boy, it just gets better and better, doesn't it, this chapter? But we're going to leave it there for now. If that's okay, if you don't mind. Hello, Lisa. You got a short one to catch up on tonight. Only 2 hours long. There you go. Not so overfacing, is it? Hang on a sec. Let's get my... There you go. No book cover. Oh, yeah. I can show you this page here. So that's another section of Chapter 4 of Foundations, Their Power and Influence. That was one of the better ones. I want to go back and listen to that straight away and soak up the good info. It was a really good chapter. It's all about scientism. And there was criticisms and critique of scientism there that we can use in our everyday lives when we're talking to people. Especially if you've got any nieces or nephews or younger siblings or children who want to go and study social science or sociology. It sounds to me like these are made-up sciences. They're not really science. And the thing that came out for me as well was that differentiation between natural sciences, right? Using the scientific method to study and observe the natural world. And then just like scientism disciplines where they just stick the word science on the end of something, mail out a few questionnaires, gather some data, and then pass it off as scientific fact because, oh, we did science to find this out. And the example of Kinsey there was a fantastic one. I need to know more about exactly what he wrote in those two bestsellers, but we got a good chunk of quotations from it. And a good insight into that as well. But a real peek behind the curtain of science and how it's used to bamboozle people, to lead people along, to get them to conform. That example right at the end there as well about it undercutting and harming the military in America sounds to me like subversion or sabotage. And this was around the time where you had the Fabian Society and all its organs and tendrils reaching across the ocean to recruit young, impressionable students to spread the ideology to them. Then the organizations which were doing that receiving foundation funding. And then that ideology getting pushed out there under the guise of this fake science called sociology and social science. So I'm absolutely staggered by this book. It's so important. It's so well written, well researched, well referenced. I got 2 more books that I have to look up now and see if I can track down out of that chapter. So that's always a win. We have Rob Smith saying thank you. You're very welcome. Appreciate you being here and leaving a comment very much. So yeah, another excellent chapter. And, half a chapter and a fantastic book. I'm glad to be getting back into the swing of live streaming. I feel like at the beginning it was really hard to read and speak and operate all the buttons. But by the end of that little 2-hour workout, I feel like I'm getting back into the swing of it. And so next week should be a little more polished. I'll be a little more, we'll start a bit earlier. I get tired around 9 o'clock. It's usually my wind down time. I'll have a shower and read a bit and go to bed, but I'm getting tired at 9 o'clock. So I'll try and start a bit earlier next week. Keep an eye on the Telegram channel where I'll announce the time, but we'll shoot for 6 or half 6 start. I was a bit late getting started today because I was like, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. But I'm glad I did in the end. So I hope you enjoyed that. Those of you who turned up and those of you who watch it on the replay. Nice little shorter video to get back in to our routine because we've got a lot to get through. We managed to, we hit page 100, but you can see there we're still, we still got a lot to get through in this book. So the coming weeks and months, we shall make good progress and keep going. So as I said at the beginning, I've got an exciting project that I've been working on that I would like to announce next Friday if I can get it all done and dusted by then. So please come over, check the replay or watch live for that. It's going to be, I'm really excited to bring this to people and get some feedback and see if people like it and think it's useful. No other news really apart from Good Friday. So do something wonderful with the people you love the most. Treat yourself well. Get some rest. Enjoy the bank holidays if you've got some of them. Put your feet up. Hopefully the weather will be kind and we'll get a bit of sunshine and mild temperatures. I'm going to be seeing family for the remainder of the weekend. Looking forward to that. While my immediate small family is still abroad and I'm waiting for their return, I can go and see my extended family, check in with them, get some nice home-cooked meals. I believe we're having leg of lamb tomorrow, one of my favorites. So that's going to be fantastic. As you can see at the bottom, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. If you want to support or get in touch, send me an email and all that. You can contact me at nick@hayesreviews.com and have a look at continuityofcontrol.com for my free educational email series that's packed full of quotes and spans 70 years of elite planning as described by them in their own words, in their own books. So it's a unique whistle-stop tour. It's a good introductory, get your feet wet kind of resource that, you can share around and send to anybody. The website looks nice. It's got good graphics on it. And those emails get delivered weekly, 5 minutes to read. Very easy. Much easier than reading for 3 hours straight on a live stream. So I need to warm up. My throat's getting tired now. So I'm going to sign out for tonight. Thank you all for being here. It's been lovely to bring some more of this book to you. And I'm looking forward to continuing next Friday around 6 or 6:30 p.m. UK time. Keep an eye on the clocks. If you're not in the UK, I think they're changing in America soon. Or maybe they have already. I don't know. Be good to yourselves and each other. Find some fulfilling things to do. Be creative. Do the dance, even if you don't like dancing. Sing the song, even if you're embarrassed about your voice. Draw the picture, even if you can't draw. Like I did tonight. I was going to swerve this. I didn't quite feel like I wanted to do it. And then got some good encouragement. And I thought, she's right. She said, get it done. Just get it done. Get something done. And I feel better for doing it and putting it out there now. So you can overcome the same resistance in your life with that hobby or habit or skill or interest that you have. Nurture it and grow it. And it's like a little flickering flame that could grow into a roaring fire of passion and creative output. But you've got to look after it and nurture it in those early days, right? Okay, I'll leave you on that. Have a lovely, rejuvenating, relaxing Easter. I'll see you next week. God bless.